Before I open the meeting, I just want to confirm that I see Dr. Nolan, Jennifer, and, is Maria not here in the afternoon? Okay, we may have not have Maria. Just want to make sure our board members were all here. Excuse me. All right. Gosh, I'm so sorry. All right, it's 1:15. Welcome everyone back. The next item on the agenda is the Access to Veterinary Care Task Force report, and I'll turn that over to Jamie and Diana. Jamie, you have the mic.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get it started. If you'll remember at our last board meeting, the task force was asked to provide a summary to Dr. Sullivan and two items, specific items to press forward at the level of the MDC. And I just want to publicly thank Dr. Sullivan and Jessica Sieferman for urging the task force to get that done, because we did drag our feet a bit, but we did get it done later than we'd wanted to. But I really appreciated his encouragement on that.
Hey, sorry about that, Jamie.
Shall I keep going?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to reiterate what Dr. Sullivan presented in his earlier MDC minutes or meeting information. So I'll move forward with that. But though if the board or any of the public have questions about those items, the list ended up being 5 items, so it was a little bigger than we had hoped, but I think there's a lot to be done. So I do wanted to also remind folks that the staff is working on a webinar or some sort of teaching support regarding gold standards versus minimum standards, and I think that's important to note. That I think Jessica mentioned that at the last meeting as well, that is in progress. We also, since the last meeting, the board has been very good at disseminating any information on loan forgiveness, student loan forgiveness, and I think that's a role that we can continue to play to really be a conduit for that kind of information. I think Dr. Sullivan also reported adequately on the meeting that Jessica and Dr. Sullivan and I had. So I'd like to really mention that that October 3rd, we also had a meeting with representatives from Western University and from UC Davis, and of people who are very vested in, I would prefer to call it spectrum of care at this point. I feel like spectrum of care is probably a more correct term, but we had a great meeting. Let's see, I think we had Dr. Hanselman and Dr. Anglis and Dr. Barr from Western and Dr. Vernau and Dr. Montgomery from UC Davis. The discussion was very open, and I think that everyone really enjoyed it. It went the full hour and a half, but they shared information on aspects of parts of their curriculum that either directly or indirectly addressed spectrum of care issues. They also compared notes on what differs in the upper versus lower classes as far as their exposure to opportunities to practice spectrum of care. And I think it became obvious, we had a lot of discussion about how the different teaching modalities of those schools address spectrum of care very differently. I think, if you think about Western's basically program of their final year being out within practices, many of those that have a lot higher caseload of spectrum of care decision-making cases, I think that they feel like they do a very good job of allowing students to understand the nuances of making those decisions, and that was interesting to note. And I think UC Davis has a different approach, but they also are very committed to developing opportunities for students in low cost and clinic work to allow them to make those, to have those experiences as well. So it was very good to hear them talking about their different modalities of teaching, but also what they're doing to really support spectrum of care decision-making. They also shared involvement, especially I think UC Davis with the grant. Remember we talked before about the AAVMC received a $1.3 million grant from the Stanton Foundation that is supporting to support the developing a collaborative and hopefully a collaborative and unified approach to spectrum of care education across veterinary colleges. So that was very informative, and it was encouraging to hear them talk about the fact that there's actually conversations going on right now about that. I think that something that I think really needs to happen, we've talked about it a lot, and I have frankly tried to start developing a question and answer, like a FAQ that we could share on our website that's regarding spectrum of care, especially talking about regulatory issues that are examples, case examples of spectrum of care decisions that help to clarify how practitioners and hopefully veterinary students can look at this as well, how they can make those decisions and still be able to follow the statutory regulations that they need to, and help them to be more comfortable. I know there was a lot of comments last VMB meeting about how a lot of practitioners are anxious about this, and so trying to provide some guidance, especially specifically case-based guidance, would be really helpful. I struggle because most of my practice work right now is large animal and food animal, so I really am feeling anxious that I am not a very good person to provide maybe some of the specific cases. So anyway, I'm personally struggling. I think Diane probably feels the same way, where neither one of us are perhaps the best for that. And so I would look toward the board to talk about that, to see if there's another board member. Dr. Salacito comes to mind really quickly that might be willing to help us with that, or whether that's something the task force should take on, or should we actually turf developing that FAQ document to the MDC. So those are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. I think also I would be remiss in not mentioning that we did receive a letter October 12th, I believe it was, from that I would like to address. I think it was from Karen Atlas and her organization. And so I think it's important that we recognize that letter. We weren't able to actually agendize it because it would have been a little bit confusing, since our report, Diane and I, is not agendized as far as a written document. It wouldn't seem appropriate to have that as perhaps the only document available. But again, we were very grateful to receive that letter and acknowledge that, and from Karen Atlas and the Animal Physical Therapy Coalition. We appreciate their continued input. We also want to assure them that we are ready to work with them regarding the legislation they are seeking when it has been introduced. The board, I think, has devoted a great deal of time to this important issue, but I think at this point we agree with the coalition that the issue of the dual jurisdiction across two boards is going to require a legislative action. And so we are not intending to cherry pick, but are ready and willing to discuss the legislation on this topic when it is introduced. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And having said that, I'd like to turn it over to Diane for any other comment that she might have. Actually, I don't know if anyone else can hear you, Diane, but we can't hear you. I mean, I can't hear you. Jennifer, can you hear her?
No, I'm wondering if the moderator muted the hearing room again.
Yes, I had to. There was feedback, copying, and papers being rustled, so I did mute it. And I can't unmute it. It has to come from your end. Can Alex unmute the microphone? There we go.
Awesome. Yay, can you hear me? Perfect. Okay, you were just seeing like a moving mouth. I was saying that I'm thankful that the Access to Care Task Force is still alive and well. I was only able to participate for about an hour in the conversation that was in regards to incremental care, and I'm excited to still talk to the universities about their enrichment program and the demographics of the students that are in the veterinary schools, because as part of Access to Care, what this was also about, and mostly about, is to be able to increase BIPOC veterinarians and RVTs, and to be able to determine what is the current makeup of RVTs and veterinarians currently, and then to be able to see how then we can increase that in order for folks that are BIPOC, that have pets, to be able to have those that look like them represented by them. And so that's something that I think that we can still be able to discuss with the schools and be able to further develop and see where we can go from there. And I also, in regards to the letter from Karen Atlas, and that they continue to send, which we are appreciative of. I just want to note that the Access to Care Task Force is here to be able to provide access to people that don't have the privilege to be able to pay for veterinary services, right? That is mostly Black, Indigenous people of color that are low income that don't have access to those services. So I welcome the opportunity of those that are in the discussing animal therapy to be able to then discuss how then access to animal therapy is going to be able to be reached to those low income Black, Indigenous people of color that are pet owners, because that's really tying in the access to care issue versus just having a kind of like a generalized access to care to therapy. It's really access to care to those that don't necessarily have access to care for their pets because of the fact that they live in perhaps rural areas, or because they are low-income folks of color. And so I just wanted to address that as well, and I am looking forward to still seeing how we can, as the VMB, try to have perhaps enact legislation or enact policies that can make it perhaps easier to, particularly for shelter medicine, to be able to have access for those that are practicing in shelter medicine, perhaps, RVTs being able to have access to spay neuter. I know that was discussed on and off, but I think that's something that perhaps we can look at again and continue to just, work through this. It's a tough issue, and it's not going to be fixed, obviously, overnight. And so I appreciate the conversation to continue to be ongoing.
Thank you.
Can I add a comment to that, Kathy?
Sure, absolutely.
I think it's important to give a little factual basis to what Diana just said. The Access to Veterinary Care Coalition back in a couple years ago did a fairly major survey. We've talked about it in the past. And they found that 28% of those owners surveyed had experienced a barrier to veterinary care in the previous 2 years, and that the overwhelming barrier for all types of care was financial. I think that gives a little bit of factual basis to what Diana just said.
Thank you. I was wondering, CVMA, I know you're here, if there's any report from your task force on access to care. I hate to put you on the spot, but while we're talking about it. Or access to care committee, I forget what you call it, sorry.
Hi, Grant Miller, CVMA. It actually is a task force, so there will be an end to it at some point, but it is currently still working. And we shared with you at your last meeting the findings of our task force, which was centralized on what we feel the veterinary profession can do to address access to veterinary care. And if you recall, we reviewed some of the ideas that we had for collaborating with the board should the opportunity arise. One of those I'm hoping will be agendized at an upcoming meeting. It has to do with RVT scope of practice. Our Access to Care task force, along with our RVT committee, did an analysis of the RVT profession and found that we may be able to increase access for low-income individuals by increasing the scope of what RVTs can do under the direct direct supervision of a veterinarian in an animal hospital setting. So we intend to submit a letter and some proposed regulations to your executive officer in hopes that those will be included in the next VMB meeting, MDC.
So Dr. Sullivan asked for them to come to the next MDC meeting to have that discussion there and then bring the recommendations from the MDC to the board. So that'll probably be in the April meeting.
Okay.
So we'll plan to give a brief presentation as time allows in the January MDC meeting, but we'll have those included in the packet and would encourage and invite all of the board members to attend or listen into that meeting to get an early understanding of where we think we want to go with that.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the update, too. Do any board members have any other questions for either Diana or Jamie? Or, and, oh, Jennifer, I didn't see your hand, sorry. Still don't see it, but all right.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nolan and Diana, for the task force. And I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Miller and the CVA for what he just said about exploring the duties for RVTs. The board did have extended duties for RVTs as an agenda item, and after a lot of work, it went nowhere. So maybe with a different collaborative group, something will come of it. So I would love to be a part of that. So I look forward to the invitation to watch what you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought it was still a hand for Jennifer, but it's a little mic. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, I can open this report to public comment. I'll take public comment from the room. And I am not seeing anyone come up. So moderator, would you mind opening it?
Thank you, Madam Board President. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. You have a 3-minute limit. I'll give you a 15-second warning. And I do see that Karen Atlas has her hand up. So Karen, you should be able to unmute yourself. And you're unmuted.
Pressing our letter and bringing it to the attention of others. I just wanted to reiterate again that I do realize that the access to care issue is so big that so many people can't get access to care for so many different reasons, whether it's they live in rural areas or it's too expensive or there's just not enough practitioners to be able to serve people. So I did want to reiterate that this is a solvable problem and that access to rehab care is critical, and that we can increase the access to care by getting this legislation passed so that we can work in a more interprofessional, collaborative way for the benefit of the consumers and pets of California. So I just wanted to say thank you again for addressing our letter and our concerns, and we look forward to hopefully working together to solve this problem next year. Thanks so much, appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, and there's not, we don't have anything to vote on that. All right. One other introduction I am remiss in making, and I meant to do it earlier. I did not see you online. We have a new, and we will hear from her as well, rep from Western University, Alexandra or Allie Ponke, and she is virtually attending with us. And so I'm sorry to introduce you earlier, Allie, but I know we'll talk to you soon. So. Okay, now we're on to number 8, which is the well, it's actually our legislation update, much of which is on the chaptered legislation.
Yep. So, and the memo that I provided is just the legislation that was successful and chaptered. And so the first one is AB 1885 that allows the veterinarians to recommend cannabis to their animal patients. The biggest impact there is the board is required to post guidelines, much like its discussion guidelines, to its website by January 1, 2024. So that's going to be something that MDC has already been tasked with, so they're going to start on that and bring something in January, probably take a couple meetings like it did the last go around with the discussion guidelines, and then have something to the board by October is the goal. So there's that. The board did vote to oppose SB 731 regarding criminal records relief. This bill was successful. As far as the impact goes, there's not much of an impact since it would just limit the amount of criminal history that we receive. So it may actually end in reduced work, not necessarily in the benefit for consumer protection, but reduced work nonetheless. The SB 1495, this was an omnibus bill, and there we asked that the legislature strike a portion of continuing education mention that was now obsolete because it had to do with requirements that were achieved over 2 decades ago. And then we also asked them to include the National Association of Veterinary Technicians for the America Recognized Veterinary Specialty Organization. So they added that in there, so that was successful. As far as just other legislation that we were monitoring, there's 2 that were successful. One dealing with, that's AB 1604, the Civil Service for the Upward Mobility Act. This doesn't really have much of an impact on the board per se because it has to do with governor appointees, so they would be the ones taking the lead. Governor appointees, Senate Committee on Rules, and the Speaker of the Assembly. But the board may want to consider mirroring that in that policy in the Administrative Procedures Manual when it deals with what you consider for MDC member appointments. Just something to consider. And then the last one was SB 1237, which really didn't do much as far as impact goes because there's already a waiver in place for those who are called to active duty. This essentially just further defined what called to active duty meant. So there, again, not much of an impact to the board, but it was a pretty light year this year. So,
Jessica, could I ask you about the Holden bill, the 16 or whatever? If we were to start to reconsider or to consider updating the administrative procedures manual, would that process start at MDC or start with us, or?
It's up to the board. I mean, yeah, so if that's something that the board wants to do, then you can just ask us to provide recommendations at the next board meeting. We would just simply mirror what's in the legislation and put it into the Administrative Procedure Manual for consideration. I don't think it would need to go to the MDC. Okay. I would like to consider asking the board if they'd be in favor of doing that, because I think it's something worthwhile to I probably need a motion to test. I think if it's just consensus, it's just directing the board to the staff to do certain things, I'm fine with it. Because you guys are going to ultimately vote on the change to the procedure manual. So we would just bring it back at the next meeting.
So the recommendation would be to task the staff with updating Administrative Procedures Manual to account to mirror the policy that's being for our MDC appointment.
Okay.
Sorry to give you more.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. And any other questions or comments regarding the ledge update?
I think I will go to public comment then. Seeing none, we'll move to the moderator for online.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the Q&A panel open. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we move to item 9, which is discussion of possible action on potential legislative proposals, and turn this back over to Jessica.
All right, so agenda item 9A, we've identified a statute that's currently conflicting with itself when it comes to existing law, and it conflicts with the new 480 after AB 2138, and that deals with VACSPs and the felony convictions. So in my memo, I talk about how in 4836.2B, it allows for the board to issue a probation and veterinary assistance controlled substance permit for, and it says the applicant or permit holder has been convicted of a state or federal felony controlled substance violation. But then in 4836.2C, it says that the board shall not issue a veterinary assistant controlled substance permit to any applicant with the state or federal felony controlled substance conviction. So it conflicts with itself there, but also with 2138 and the board not being able to deny a registration for any conviction that was over 7 years old, or been expunged or dismissed, so it conflicts there. This has caused some confusion when we get these applications of whether or not we should be issuing or denying it. It also makes it so the board has no discretion to consider anyone with a felony conviction, where in all of our other license types we do have that discretion, and it's all based on the APA and existing laws about substantial relationship criteria and things to consider when looking at convictions. And this is something that we do all the time on a regular basis, my staff and I, and something that is done at the Attorney General's office and through the ALJ. We look at rehabilitation criteria, and this makes it so we have no discretion, and no matter what, we have to deny it. So the board can do a couple things. They can either, because we need to fix the fact that it's conflicting with existing law. So we provided two options. One would just be adding unless otherwise permitted under Section 480, and that's in the first potential option. The other potential option is simply striking it. And that would just mean that the board would have the discretion of whether or not to grant someone the license or not based on the existing criteria that's already in law. So with that, I'll turn it over to the board.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually preferred looking at these options, the first option, just in the way it was written, but I'm interested to see, and I understand what we need to do that we need to fix this to clarify it. But I'm open to both options, get to the same place. I just look at the first one that's written more correctly. Go ahead.
Yeah, I felt the same way as you. Originally, I had the first option with adding the unless otherwise permitted under Section 480. But after hearing your discussion of it, Jessica, I feel like that might be also a little bit too prescriptive, because it basically says unless it's exempted by Section 480, then we don't even have the latitude to offer it, even if there's substantial rehabilitation or what, you know. So I guess after your discussion, I would be more inclined to want to just remove it completely.
Jamie, Dr. Miller?
Yeah, I think I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you folks, but I think I agree with both of you. I think it might be simpler to just strike the whole, to use the second option.
Are we muted? Can you hear us, Jamie, at this point?
That's a lot better. When you were speaking earlier, Kathy, before Christina jumped in, I could hardly hear you. I don't know why.
Make sure to speak in the mic.
You know what, I had turned my mic off because I was worried about sort of ambient noise, so I apologize. I forgot to turn it on. Okay, thank you. Diana.
Yes. Oh. I also agree with the second option of removing it completely. I think in the spirit of what Senator Durasso was attempting to do is, particularly, I'm like, actually, this kind of ties in with Access to Care Task Force, is there is a predominantly Black and brown folks that have been targeted to be able to have felonies and misdemeanors, right, and particularly felonies. And so to be able to have the ability to determine whether or not and have somebody present themselves and state why it is that they should, be able to receive a veterinary license would, one, increase access to care to those folks that perhaps have been targeted unjustly, and also doesn't limit us. And so it would make more sense to be able to just strike that completely, to not have a discrepancy, and then also still be in line with 480, with section 480.
And I just want to clarify, this is for the VACSP, so the Veterinary Assistant Controlled Substance Permit, not for a veterinary license. Yeah.
Okay, and I take it, because the staff presented, Tara, you have no preference either way on this, language-wise?
I think it's probably cleaner if you strike subdivision C.
Okay, perfect.
Because then you're effectively using Business and Professions Code Section 480, and that would, for those controlled substance misdemeanors and felonies, which is what this is, subdivision C is aimed at, because, these are individuals who don't otherwise have a license. They have access to controlled substances, so I'm sure the legislature was just trying to make sure that people weren't getting these permits just to get access to drugs and then sell them. And 480 would still protect consumers by not allowing those permits to be issued if those misdemeanors or felony convictions were inside of 7 years, unless, there's rehabilitation proven by the applicant. And then anything over 7 years, I think that's where we really get into the returning criminals to society and helping them be productive members. And so, we certainly wouldn't necessarily need to go against that for consumer protection here.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think you could just strike subsection C.
Okay, I'd like to call for a motion then. Diana, you want to grab it?
I will make a motion to strike section C of the, oh my gosh, I'm going back to the I would like to make a motion to request a legislative amendment to strike BPC section 4836.2 subdivision C completely.
And a second? I'll second. All right. Before we open to public comment, or no, before we take the vote, I'll open to public comment on this. And I see none in the room, so moderator?
Thank you, Madam Board President. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and send it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right, I assume there's no more board discussion, so Jessica, please do the honors.
Ms. Bowler?
Aye.
Dr. Bradbury?
Yes.
Ms. Laredo?
Yes.
Dr. Nolan?
Yes.
Ms. Prado?
Yes.
And Ms. Berber is absent. Motion carries. All right. So the next legislative proposal is to amend the Business and Professions Code 4846. This was drastically repealed and then revised and added as part of our sunset bill. Right now, this section that we're looking at is really clarifying. Current law says that license verification, including any disciplinary enforcement history, must be directly submitted to the board from each state, Canadian province, and United States territory. And we're concerned that the way that that's worded, it makes it require a physical act from one board sending us something regarding the license verification, when there's a lot of state boards like us who provide primary source data through our website, and so there's states that do the same thing where you can look up a license on their website. You can even generate a PDF that has their license verification information, but it's not necessarily that board sending us something. It's us going to that website. And so we're just provided some alleged proposal in front of you on page 2 of suggested changes that we're seeking.
Thank you, and that makes perfect sense. Any board members with any questions on this language? Oh, okay, yeah. I don't see anybody up there, so Christina.
Okay, so thank you. I've personally experienced this in trying to have relief vets come, so thank you. The way that it's worded here, the board shall obtain, it to me seems to imply that the board is responsible for, would then be responsible for obtaining license verification, just the way that's worded, where like currently the applicants will ask the other boards to send stuff. And the way it's worded here, it just seems like then it's on us to do all of the work. And so I wondered if we could word it in a way that allowed for both, and I came up with something that I don't know how I had like license verification, including any disciplinary or enforcement history, must be provided to the board from each state, Canadian province or United States territory when electronic verification is not possible, or something to that matter. So I love the idea that I just don't want it to all, if there isn't electronic verification, then it's on us to contact the other boards and have them send us stuff. So that's my concern with the wording.
I think Tara and I went back and forth on this, trying to get at that same thing. But I don't have any concerns with how you proposed it either. Do you have?
Okay. So let's see here. It would be B, the applicant shall disclose each state, Canadian province, or United States territory in which the applicant currently holds or has ever held a license to practice veterinary medicine. License verification, comma, including any disciplinary or enforcement history, comma, must be provided to the board from each state, comma, Canadian province, comma, or United States territory when electronic verification is not possible.
Oh, my only question is, must be provided from each state. So are we now putting this on the burden on the other states instead of, really making sure that the applicant is the one who is?
So we could say, let's see here, we could do this, maybe just keep it the way it was. License verification, including any disciplinary or enforcement history, must be directly submitted to the board from each state when electronic verification is not possible. Maybe we don't have to rewrite that.
Well, now I'm looking at if electronic license verification cannot be confirmed, the applicant shall ensure license verification, including any disciplinary enforcement history, be provided.
But I want to make sure that it's clear that we are getting the primary sources from the school, so that we don't want to open it up to where the applicant can submit proof that they are receiving, that primary source has to come from the school. So whether it's them sending us electronically through email or through regular mail or through their website, the primary source is the school, and not putting the applicant in the middle to where we can accept the applicant saying, this is from my school.
You mean from the licensing body, not the school?
No, so we want to accept license verification from the school, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something that they're physically sending to us through an email or through a letter. My team can go onto their website and pull the verification.
Not from a
About
school,
schools,
though, from a licensing body.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes,
Okay,
yeah. Sorry.
right, and I think this gets there because this allows you, board staff, the initial opportunity to perform electronic license verification. But if it can't be confirmed, then it's on the applicant. The applicant shall ensure, so it's on the applicant to make sure that state provides, and it's not, you know, it doesn't have to be directly, but
Do you want
provides.
to read what you have?
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, so, 4846, Business and Professions Code 4846, subdivision B, no changes to the first sentence. The second sentence would begin, if electronic license verification cannot be confirmed, comma, the applicant shall ensure license verification, comma, including any disciplinary or enforcement history, comma, be provided from each state, Canadian province, or United States territory in which the applicant has identified the applicant currently holds or has ever held a license to practice veterinary medicine.
Could we do confirmed on the board's website? Because my concern is they're going to say, well, they can submit it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it needs to come, I just want to make it clear that it has to come from the state board, the license verification. Or do you think it's?
Well, we're getting wordy, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to, you know, minimize the number of words.
So what, if we kept the board shall, or, again, the way it was before, license verification, including any disciplinary or enforcement history, must be directly submitted to the board from each state, Canadian province, or United States territory when electronic verification from, or is not possible, or I feel like you can just add that, so. But I think you're right, Kathy, if we left it the way it is,
Yeah, I think, honestly.
maybe, I just,
It says shall, it doesn't say how you should.
it looks though that the board is responsible for reaching out to the other states. The way I read that, I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts about that.
What about license verification, including any disciplinary or enforcement history through either electronic means or direct writing, shall be submitted to the board from each state?
They're not, the states aren't electronically submitting it to you.
Right. This is not Tara and I went back and forth and was trying to figure out how to get us there.
Well, can I ask a question? Do you read the language as it is here, as Christina said at the beginning, is because of the language shall obtain, as putting more onus on the board, on your staff to do this versus the applicant to provide?
Yeah, I definitely see what she's saying, because when it comes to the license applications, on the applicant to provide us all the information. And so while we do require primary source, the onus is always going to be on the applicant to provide that, you know, to make sure that it happens. So I see what Dr. Bradbury is saying.
All right.
Jessica, repeat again what you wanted added in terms of it being on the website?
So goal has always been primary source, to get that license verification from the state board. It can't come from the applicant or other means, right? So the way that it's written, it makes it sound like the state board is having to send us something, a license verification, right? Whether that's, right now they're doing it electronically or they're mailing it to us. There's a lot of state boards who provide that information on their website, so my team can go onto their website and pull it and use that instead of waiting on the board for 2-3 weeks to send us something. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's what we want to be able to clarify that we can do.
Can the applicants provide, like, can they go online and provide that link and like upload it to something? Or
We don't want to accept it from the applicant.
You
Just
want to
like
accept it
exam
from-
scores, we don't accept exam scores from the applicant. It has to be primary source.
Well,
hey, sorry, Tara, will you repeat what you had said already? I know, I'm like the very last one.
The last one.
The
Okay.
last one.
License verification, including any disciplinary or enforcement history through electronic means or direct writing, that could be direct submission, shall be submitted or shall be provided from each state, Canadian province, or United States territory in which the applicant has identified the applicant currently holds or has ever held a license to practice veterinary medicine. So it's, you know, trying to get at, there's an electronic way of receiving license verification or direct submission from the state.
Yeah. And then the first part was the applicant shall versus the board shall.
it's at the, yeah.
I think the first part, we just started with how it used to be written there, where it says license verification, and then in the middle part, it has shall be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can always propose it, and it can just evolve over time as legislation does. So maybe the staffers might want to tweak it as well. But as long as they understand the intent of it, we can work with them to get us there.
Well, we all know it won't happen overnight, to say the least. So if Tara's comfortable looking at the language, because I know you've been writing it over there and I did not.
All right, I've got one final version that I think.
Oh, okay.
Okay, hand.
I think it's at the point, and assuming, you know, let's receive some more comments on this, but this is the version I'm currently working through. License verification, including any disciplinary enforcement history, shall be confirmed through electronic means or direct submission from each state, Canadian province, or U.S. territory in which the applicant has identified the applicant currently holds or has ever held a license to practice veterinary medicine. That way, the focus is on confirming license verification through electronic means. That opens it up to where the board can just confirm it electronically. And if that doesn't work, then it has to be confirmed through direct submission from the state.
I think that sounds really good. All right. Christina, you started this, so I want to make sure, okay.
Okay, so should I make a motion?
Well, I wanted to check, Jamie, you're good, Jennifer, everybody up
Well,
on the,
No, Jamie.
Jamie.
I like the version Tara just read, but I still think there's kind of room for the applicant to not feel the ultimate responsibility. Am I missing that?
But it starts at the if you read the first sentence, the applicant shall disclose each, oh, and that's where they currently hold.
Okay.
I guess
well,
I would say that existing law already kind of creates this issue, because right now it just says license verification must be directly submitted to the board from each state. There's no applicant responsibility in this sentence.
Then I'm fine with it. I just wanted to check that.
And Jennifer, okay. Before we, so I guess now we are ready for a motion.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve submission of the legislative proposal to the California State Legislature to amend BPC Section 4846 Subdivision B as discussed here today.
Let's make that as revised at this meeting.
Okay.
We
As
don't want the
revised
whole
at this
discussion.
And I'll second that. Any other discussion before I open it to public comment? Seeing none. I'm looking at the room for public comment on this item, seeing nothing. All right. Moderator, please open it up.
Thank you, Madam Board President. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Jessica. We're ready.
Ms. Bowler,
Aye.
Dr. Bradbury,
Yes.
Ms. Laredo,
Yes.
Dr. Nolan,
Yes.
Ms. Prado,
Yes.
motion carries. All right, thank you for bearing with me through that one. The last legislative proposal that we'd like the board to consider is for the Wellness Evaluation Committee. As you know, we have vacancies on the Wellness Evaluation Committee. We have the public members vacancy, the public member vacancy, and we have recruited for this. We have not received any public applications, but we did receive applications from RVTs who want to serve on the Wellness Committee. Unfortunately, the statute right now doesn't allow for an RVT to serve on the committee, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you have RVTs who are participating in the Wellness Committee or in the Wellness Program. I think it would benefit all involved to have the perspective of an RVT on the Wellness Evaluation Committee. So we're asking that that be added, that an RVT member be added to the Wellness Evaluation Committee. And then just another minor change in 4061B1. It talks about considerations that the board should provide when appointing the veterinarian member, but I think that could apply to the public and the RVT members, so I'm recommending that you just move it up into A to say what the board would consider when making the appointment. So that's the legislative proposal in front of you.
Thank you. Any questions from the board members on that? Jennifer?
I just had a suggestion or to see what the rest of the board thinks. So yes, we need an RVT, at least one on there. We have had problems in the past recruiting even DVMs. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on, instead of adding one RVT, changing the 3 veterinarians to 3 licensees, and then we could choose from whoever applies at that time. We know that there might be different people available at any given time. Just wanting to hear what the board thinks of that.
That's a good, interesting idea, but I don't know about its ramifications elsewhere.
My only concern with that is that you might have a committee with just RVTs on it, or a committee with just veterinarians on it, and because both professions are part of this wellness committee, I'd just be concerned about losing that perspective.
Yeah, I would have expected that the board would, or when going through that process of choosing, they would never go that route where it's all one or the other. But I understand where Jennifer's coming from. I mean, frankly, we're having a hard time getting a public member right now. So the RVT addition is critical, I think, because obviously they're licensees and they're part of this process. And I do agree with the moving the language up as well. So, Diana?
Is there a way to possibly state 3 licensees and then also write in a sentence of, well, now it's like I'm trying to put Kara's mind in my mind.
Watch out. Yes. Whoa, yeah. You want to go in there?
You know, of including kind of what, you know, Jessica, the concerns of Jessica, of then ensuring that there is at least one veterinarian and one RVT amongst the 3 licensees. Geez, that's terrible language, but something to that effect. I'm not sure. Or we just leave it, but.
Sorry, Dr. Nolan and Jennifer.
Yeah, I really like the spirit of this conversation, and I would add that I think adding one more member to a committee that we're having a hard time filling spots on may be shooting ourselves in the foot.
Okay. Jennifer, oh no, I thought I saw your hand up again, but.
It was. I was going to make the same comment that Diana made, 3 licensees, and then we specified that it's at least 1 RVT and at least 1 DVM. But in this case, we're not separating the classes of licensees by merit of education. It's just about healing. So it can be any makeup of the licensees as long as we have representation from both professions.
All right, Tara, not sure.
You know, for your consideration, you could go back to 5 people appointed by the board to address Dr. Nolan's concern of adding more people to a committee we can't even currently find enough bodies for. So 5 people, and each wellness evaluation committee shall have the following composition: at least 1 veterinarian licensed under this chapter, at least 2 public members, at least 1 registered veterinary technician. So that's at least representation by 1 licensee, 1 registrant, public members, and then so that's 1, 2, 3, 4 identified individuals. And then the 5th one could be another public member or a veterinarian or an RVT. That way, you know, you're leaving yourself a little bit more wiggle room with your applicants to, you know, complete each committee of 5 people.
I like that idea personally, but okay, Dr. Bradbury.
I just was wondering where we came up with 3 veterinarians in the first place. Like, I just don't know the history of it and whether there was some.
This was in place way.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Any other thoughts? I kind of like Tara's because we'd rather operate with a full committee than having these vacancies just because we cannot get the right kind of person. And I think that gives us the option, and you at least have 1 vet, at least 1 RVT, and at least 2 public members, and then, I mean, I prefer to have more practitioners there than public members, in my opinion, but if you can't get them, I guess, and they're so busy to begin with. Does anyone have any other comments on Tara's language, which I think is what's before us? I don't see. Jamie, Jennifer? Okay, Diana? All right. Yeah, Tara.
Thank you, President Bowler, for discussing the makeup of the committee, but what do you think about keeping it at 5 people on the committee?
I liked your language because I think it gives us the options, keeps it at 5. We won't be, because I feel bad that we republicize these, and it's hard. Everyone is very, very busy, and there's no, you know, we understand that. So I think this gives us options for placing it, keeps the committee at 5, and allows for an RVT to be on. So it kind of does everything we needed. At least one, yeah. Okay, very elegant. Do I have a motion on this before we open this up? Well, I'll make it if you want, a move to well, wait a minute, where's my little language here? No, I'm gonna change the language, but here it is. Approve submission to the legislative proposal to the state legislature to amend, is this right, 4861? With the language as we've revised it today. All right? Is there a
I'd
second?
be happy to second that.
Thank you. All right, no more discussion, then we'll move to public comment. I see no one in the room. Moderator?
Thank you,
We'll
Madam
open
Board
it up.
President. Thank you. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Jessica, no more discussion?
Ms. Bowler?
Aye.
Dr. Bradbury?
Yes.
Ms. Laredo?
Yes.
Dr. Noland?
Yes.
Ms. Prado?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Now on to item 10, which is some proposed action on proposed regulations. Jessica, turning it to you.
So I'm going to actually turn this over to our policy analyst, Jeff, and Karen
Oh,
Holbo
Jeff, I'm
for
sorry.
10A status update on pending regulations.
I'm sorry, Jeff. I had it written down and I forgot.
Thank you. So today, can you guys hear me?
You can hear Jamie, Jenner. I just want to make sure the folks online can hear.
Okay.
Moderator, can we just confirm that we're not seeing Dr. Nolan and Jennifer Laredo? They may just have their cameras off.
Yeah.
Oh, there they are. Good.
Yes.
All right, fine. Sorry, Jamie. And you can hear? Perfect. All right. Sorry. I didn't know.
Thank you, board members. Pleasure to be here. So today, I'll go over what the regulations package we have going on right now, the status updates, and where we're at. So currently, we just got done with the 45-day public comment period for the civil penalties for citation. We did receive 3 substantive comments related to the actual package. And to give you a little background, with the package, it's in alignment with the board's authority for the executive officer with her task in determining and issuing violations based on the severity of the facts provided to her during the course of the investigation. The classifications are ranked in such a way that Class A, Class B, and Class C violations are determined on the severity of those actual accusations. With Class A violations being relatively minor, Class B's being violations that occur with some injury, and Class C with incurring with either multiple Class B violations or death of an animal. The primary focus of this regulation package was to address the issue related to while engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine. This package was created to resolve that issue and to give the board its authority already granted in statute and to address those issues. The common issues the board receives related to like CE audits, where an individual may fail the audit, but it wasn't necessarily engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine. Another one might be a licensee lying on the renewal, stating that they actually completed the CE when they didn't, in fact, complete the CE when they get an audit. Another area might be if the licensee gets a DUI. That would be another area. This change, like I said before, would utilize the board's already existing authority under the Practice Act and incentivize individuals to comply with the requirements of law. So based on that, 3 comments we did receive, the first one was from the CVMA, where they did praise the board on their desire to go after unlicensed individuals. So they did give us praise there. They did raise concerns in relation to the area where it says while engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine. Their primary issue or concern with the proposed legislation was that the board may overstep its authority. And they questioned its actual authority with these changes. Their other issue was related to the training requirements of staff at the board. They felt that it's possible that staff might not have all the necessary training to make those proper determinations. One of the next respondents, Dr. Ferry, also raised concerns over the removal while engaged in veterinary practice, and he stated it leaves too much to interpretation. The last respondent, Tim Metzer, he primarily seemed to be concerned over any type of fine or citation. And those were the responses we got from that. So at this time, we are asking the board to review the responses that we have created for you guys to respond to these individuals as part of the regulations package as required in the final statement of reasons before the board can move forward and get that regulations package.
And to clarify, so we are on, it looks like we skipped to agenda item 10B. We'll go back to 10A after we can go ahead and finish this conversation first.
Could I interrupt for 1 second? Dr. Nolan may have just lost her connection. Moderator, could you double check? I just want to make sure she can hear all this. Yeah, she just texted me. There you are, you're back. Okay, just checking.
And of the next item, which is the RVT education. I know we discussed this earlier today with the 2 proposed regulations, 2036.1 and 2068.5.
Excuse me, Jeff. I actually think while they still have in their heads what you just said about the civil
10B.
penalties, about 10B, that you should go ahead and let them take action on it, and then you can finish the summary.
Back to 10A, yeah.
Okay, I apologize.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure other board members may also have questions on these, so I'm going to start with the rest of the board. And if anyone has questions on, and this is on the civil.
Correct, the civil penalties for citation.
And I'm sure we all read the CVMA comments as well. Do I have any questions by board members? That's fine. Dr. Nolan.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I seemed to drop off, but is everybody at my back? You can hear us?
Yes.
Jennifer and I? Yeah, I thought a lot about this, and I talked to Jessica about it actually, and I think I've come to the conclusion that I think it's reasonable, the responses that we have, and that this is a good thing for consumer protection. So I just wanted to go on record to say that.
Thank you. Dr. Bradbury?
So I'm wondering why we aren't adding substantially related to instead of just having related to in the language, which is something that the CVMA brought up. I do, I trust my EO right now, but, I think we want to be careful about expanding things too far. So I'm just wondering why we don't have substantially related to, which is in the language of all of our other regulations.
So it's already in existing law when it comes to making the nexus to the practice of veterinary medicine. The substantially related to is also in the, I believe, the rehabilitation criteria and the substantial, there's a regulation specific to substantial relationship criteria. So for us, it was just that it's not necessary here because it's already in existing law. And when we're talking about the substantially related to and what we are already doing when it comes to discipline, it's something that we have to do on a regular basis already. And so I think for the proposed response is that it's just not necessary to add it in. And it would, if you do make amendments now, you will have to delay the whole thing and go through another public comment period. And just when we're already having to make that nexus, it was the thought of staff.
But it wouldn't really change the law much. It just means that we'd have to have another public comment period.
Yeah.
I was just going to point out that these are citations. It's just an enforcement action. It's not disciplinary action. So these are issued, you know, for something more than, you know, a minor inspection violation, but something that merits bringing this to the attention of the licensee, fining them for it, but it's less than going after their license.
Right.
This is not, you know, an accusation.
Except that it also is going on their permanent record and preventing them from serving on certain things. And I mean, it's a citation.
So it's not permanent, it's 5 years from the date that it's satisfied, then it's no
still,
longer?
But it's still on the public record as a citation.
For 5 years, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I would like it to say substantial, but, and even if the other things, other regulations have that in there, I guess I feel like it would be an important addition.
So, and when this first came up, I felt something similar, I think, to Jamie and other folks. This made some sense. It seemed like it was a less expensive, less onerous approach to some things that we would typically have to go through a disciplinary process and potential probation, et cetera, et cetera. So better for the licensee and better for the board. But I am concerned about the comments that, and I just want to make sure the protections are there, that it says, you know, we have, the board does not intend to issue citations for violations unrelated to the practice of veterinary. We know that's our intent, but where's the guarantee that it can't? The examples you use are DUI, CE, those are all substantially within the practice. We know we're not trying to broaden the scope here, but I'm wondering for our stakeholders, where can we show them that it's guaranteed that we cannot go further?
I guess you'd probably go to what the citations look like themselves, because every citation alleges a violation, a cause for the citation, which is, you know, specifically referencing Business and Professions Code sections and CCR regulations. So we can show this Veterinary Medicine Practice Act statute was violated. This supporting regulation was violated. So, you know, you can't just randomly allege random acts of, you know, that potentially are problematic. You have to, in every citation, relate the conduct leading to the need for the citation to an actual statute or regulation. And I do want to mention, though, that I think it's 4883, I forget, the board can enforce other laws, other federal and state laws relating to the practice of veterinary medicine. So I don't think it's a good idea to put parameters in this regulation that it's just things listed in the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act, arguably because that subdivision that the board can enforce federal and state laws relating to the Veterinary Practice Act, they already have the ability. So adding that language probably wouldn't hurt, really, but what's the point? Because it still relates to the practice of veterinary medicine. So, point being, every citation specifically cites to the law that was violated. So, you know, it's not going to come in under something random. It's all going to relate to Practice Act, statutes, and other federal and state laws that are violated relating to the practice, and regulations, CCR sections.
So they're strict, I mean, it's not a wide, all right. Jamie, Dr. Nolan. Dr.
Yeah,
Nolan, can you hear me?
thanks.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, now, can you hear me now? Sorry. So I think where I'm getting kind of confused a little bit is the term, are we talking about substantially related to the practice of veterinary medicine? Or I was under the impression the term was while engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine. And I could see where if you're using the term while engaged in the practice, I don't see how that directly relates to like not doing your continuing education. In my mind, practicing veterinary medicine is practicing medicine. Continuing education is something that we ask you to do, we require you to do in order to practice medicine. So I guess that's where I'm getting a little confused. And maybe somebody could clarify that for me.
Turning to Jessica.
Yeah, so I think, so the current proposal is striking while engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine, which is what, Dr. Nolan, you're referring to. The substantially relating to the practice is a suggestion that the CVMA is asking for.
And I think that's there's a statement, and I'm sorry, I don't know I'm having a hard time finding it, but it was some of the language that said a class A, B, or C violation involves a person who has violated a statute or regulation relating to the practice of veterinary medicine, and that's what the current language is being proposed. So violations involve a person who has violated a statute or regulation relating to the practice of veterinary medicine. What the CVMA had proposed is saying the violation involve a person who has violated a statute or regulation substantially relating to the practice of veterinary medicine and included in the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act. And I guess in my mind, and just even after this discussion, I still feel like I like that language better. I feel like it does protect stakeholders from potential overinterpretation of what is related to the practice of veterinary medicine, and kind of holds the bar a little bit higher and makes it be clear that it's substantially related. So that's my feeling on it.
Tara.
Just one more clarification here. You don't have the actual regulatory text before you. And I think that would probably better clarify it for you, because right now you're just seeing, you know, a piece of the regulation, not the whole thing. I mean, just for example, existing 2043 subsection A is Class A violations involve a person while engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine has violated a statute or regulation relating to the practice of veterinary medicine, but has not caused either death or harm to an animal patient. Here's where we get the real meat and potatoes of these citations. We're talking about death, harm to animal patients. It's not just, you know, you did something that kind of relates to the practice of veterinary medicine. No, the text is actually very explicit. So Class A violations, you didn't cause the death or harm to the animal patient. That would be subject to a civil penalty, and that's you know, really what we're talking about. What is the fine? What's the civil penalty associated with the violation that's cited in the citation? So, you know, would it be helpful to show the text of the regulation?
I mean, it might. I guess I'm still not understanding why there's this resistance to adding that language.
Well, can I jump in and say, one of my reasons to resist it is when they say the words included in the Veterinary Medical Practice Act, that's already in the wording. So we're adding it again. I think some of their recommendations, like Tara just said, are probably taken piecemeal and not when you read the whole, you know, the whole regulation as a whole. So it feels like it's a little redundant. But again, I understand, Christina, how you want substantially related. I mean, I'm okay with that, but I think adding all that other stuff is maybe redundant.
Yeah, I was just hoping to add substantially to the wording.
So can I ask you, Christina, do you consider not completing all your CE substantially related to the practice of veterinary medicine?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm wondering if we could maybe adjust, well, the board responses slightly to these, unless, Christina, you don't like this to begin with, to allow or to maybe better explain.
Well, I'm just one person.
No, it's important. No, to better explain, maybe adjust this, to clarify a little bit better some of the limits here, so that it's for, because these responses do become public.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, again, usually these responses are fine and they cover everything, almost always, and I'm just wondering if there's some substantial reason to look at them maybe and modify these responses if we're comfortable with the proposal to begin with. And it may not be the right approach. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I think for me, the discussion that I've heard from Tara and Jessica has made sense, but they keep saying that it basically, that's what we mean by it anyway. So in that case, why don't we just put the word in there?
Yeah, sorry.
To add the word in because it's repetitive isn't actually creating new protections or making something better. And that's where I need to be able to justify to the Office of Administrative Law, why are we repeating ourselves? Why is this excessive? So there is sort of with the Occam's razor approach of you want to do what you're doing but not repeat, and that's why this language was rejected, is that it's not actually adding new protections. The board is limited to what it can cite in the Practice Act and in the regulations and some federal and state laws, but it has to be able, the substantial relationship, that whole concept was dealt with in AB 2138, and we have a regulation defining it that was done as a part of that package. And so, however, I am open to and would be happy to kind of tear in and make these responses more clear, that the board isn't adding new layers. We're just being able to cite on these statutes that otherwise are not considered citable because they're not directly during when practicing medicine, but they are a part of the Practice Act that licensees are supposed to be following.
And the current responses do attend to getting that as cite the regulation for substantial relationship in 2040. So it doesn't sound like you guys are concerned about the other responses, so I don't know if we need to redo all the responses. But I think if we have more guidance from you of what specifically you'd like added into the responses, that would help.
Okay. Jamie, sorry, I'm still looking at my words here and not looking at the screen. Sorry, Jamie.
Well, I kind of want to go back to something that Tara said, and if you go back and pull up the actual wording, and what we're striking, it does kind of help because right in the first sentence, you know, for instance, I'm on 2043A of the proposed language.
Right.
And it says Class A violations involve a person who, and then we're striking while engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine, that says who has violated a statute or regulation relating to the practice of veterinary medicine. So the wording is still in there that relates to the practice of veterinary medicine, but the good thing that that does is it actually allows unlicensed individuals to fall under this cite and fine easily as well. So I guess when I read the language, that's why, Christina, I kind of feel like we're being redundant. It is not necessary. It's kind of already relating, you know, back to what is related to the practice of medicine. That's my 2 bits worth.
I do not do it anymore. Well, and it may be that that these responses are clear enough. I don't know if there's any other language we want to put in to clarify not just the intent, but the limitations we already have.
So, and we do, in the first part of the board response, it talks about the statutes that are already in place that that we are governed by and have to follow. So we talk about business profession sections 125.9, 148, 4875.2, and 4883, and how that already lays essentially the parameters of where the citation can go. And then in 2040, we talk about what substantially related means. We say the board does not intend to issue citations for violations unrelated to the practice of veterinary medicine, but criminal convictions occurring outside the actual engagement of veterinary practice can be and often are still considered related to the practice of veterinary medicine, and there's a lot of case law supporting that. So I think when we look at these responses, I think we've touched on where you guys have raised concerns, and so if you guys want us to add more, we can. We just need more specific guidance of where you feel it's lacking.
Can I ask another question?
Yes, please.
Sorry. Okay, so in this where it says a crime or act is substantially related to the qualifications, functions, or duties, and then it says if to a substantial degree it evidences present or potential unfitness of a person holding a license to perform the functions authorized by the license, et cetera, et cetera. So what you're saying is we don't want substantial in here because that level rises above a citation?
No, not necessarily. It means substantially related is already in 2040.
Right, but we aren't saying it's substantially related. So how is that's a definition of substantially related, yet we're not putting substantially related in there. So that isn't, I'm sorry if I'm confused. I think, you know, maybe I'm just the only person hung up on this, and there's a lot of other people on the board, so I'm happy to, I think I'm the only one that's got a problem with this, so.
And so also substantially related could be a higher burden as well to consider for discipline. When we're talking about citations, again, we're not issuing a citation that's not related to the practice, because we can't issue a citation that's not related to the practice. And it's also citations are a lower burden than a disciplinary matter. So I do think that keeping it as the current language for related to the practice it opens it up. It aligns more with the intent of what a citation is doing.
Mm-hmm. That makes more sense to me than what has been said previously, which is that it was already, you know, in there. So that makes more sense to me.
So perhaps we can add to the response about the difference in the burdens when it comes to discipline versus a citation. If that would help.
Yeah, it would help.
I mean, that's the reason, that's part of the goal of this as well, right? To alleviate some of those and to speed it up and also to make it easier on the respondent as well as the, yeah, maybe so. And maybe the line in the response, the board does not intend to issue citations, maybe that needs to be strengthened, the board cannot, or, it's not,
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
intend
true.
to, the board by
can't.
law cannot issue citations or for violations unrelated.
And we can mirror that language, because that's kind of in the response for number 2, where there was a concern that one of the sections didn't talk about a statute or regulation violation occurring, and so there was concerns that it made it too broad. But we clarify that we can only issue a citation if a statute or regulation was violated. So we can just put that in there as well.
All right, is that, so at this point, I know we're gonna open this to public comment, and there will be public comment undoubtedly, but do we need to take a motion to, instruct the staff to?
Yeah, so there's a
responses?
proposed, well, not all of the responses. We can rework that first one to include the comments made here regarding clarifying the burden, the difference in the burden of a citation versus discipline, and also that the board cannot issue citations for things other than a violation of the statutes or regulations. And then you would approve the other responses. But the motion is in the memo.
Would that, I'm looking around to see if I see any consensus or questions, or would that satisfy some of the concerns? Christina? Do we need to do a motion before we open this to public comment?
It's up to you guys.
Then let's open it, why don't we open right now to public comment?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Members of the board, Dan Baxter with the CVMA. First of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Bradbury, because you teed this issue up better than I ever could have, and then you actually saved me a fair amount of time here today. I want to tell you why the inclusion of substantially related is not only well advised, but it's absolutely imperative. And it boils down to something that the lawyers here in the room are very familiar with, and it's canons of statutory and regulatory interpretation. Anytime different language is used to describe a same or similar concept in a legislative or regulatory package, it is going to be legally presumed, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can ask Ms. Welch, you can ask Ms. Talbo. It's going to be legally presumed later on that different meanings were intended. If you have within 16 CCR language that in various instances uses substantially related, and then you turn later on and introduce a provision into that same Practice Act that uses the term simply related, those are necessarily going to be presumed to mean different things. Now, you can have, in the materials that we're reviewing here, references to other provisions that use the term substantially. That's fine for purposes of this discussion here today and what's intended here today. But to your point again, Dr. Bradbury, very well said, in 10 years, we're not going to have the benefit of those materials. We're not going to have the benefit of the benevolent intent of this group sitting here today. All we're going to have is the black and white that's on the paper, and there will be two separate phrases being used. And people being called upon to interpret it later on are going to have to, pursuant to canons of statutory interpretation, accord those terms different meanings. Here, that's point number one. Point number two is, as I think somebody sort of asked rhetorically here, and maybe it was you, Dr. Bradbury, what's the real problem with using that word? There is no problem with using that word. It gives you a much more defined, digestible, understandable meaning. It harkens back to things that are already defined within the Practice Act. And again, don't take my word for it. The analysis that Mr. Holguin and his colleagues prepared already refers back to 16 CCR 2040, which defines substantial relationship. And they say in their response that in defining what we're talking about here, you should look to that. So this is what I would call a valence issue. This is an issue where I think on some level here, everybody in the room sort of agrees. We're just having a hard time actually getting there. And how you get there here is to rely on, again, canons of statutory interpretation and how this is going to be looked at later on down the road. I beseech you, I implore you in the strongest possible terms, please include substantially related. And I would also ask that you reconsider referring back to
15
the Practice
seconds.
Act in the last clause of what we suggest, because again, that gives you something that really levels you, really grounds you, and leaves it open to not a whole big bunch of interpretation. Thank you.
Anyone else in the room? And I guess since we're in public comment now, I'll open it up and then we'll go back into discussion again. Moderator, could you open it to anyone online?
Thank you, Madam Board President. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand or displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Well, I mean, personally, I have no problem with including substantially. I don't, duplicative words, I know it would cost us more time, et cetera, et cetera. I just, and I realize that making it uniform across the board is probably preferable, but I'm looking to Tara, and I realize there'll be extended time to put this public, et cetera, and you would have to explain to OAL why we're saying it twice, but, you know, being repetitive. But I just am asking the experts on the staff if there's any, we know what this is supposed to mean. If this word codifies that in a better way for longer term, it doesn't seem to be a real problem to me, but I'm a lay person.
So I think Tara can chime in if I'm misunderstanding this, but currently there's a lower burden of proof when it comes to issuing a citation. Mm-hmm. It's under the preponderance of evidence versus a clear convincing evidence, and in the substantial relationship criteria, that is referring to discipline, which is a higher burden. So that would be my concern, is that when you do this substantial, you're at a higher burden, and so I just want to make sure that that's understood for a citation, which again is preponderance of the evidence versus clear and convincing.
So is that defeating the purpose of the ability to do citation by?
It makes it harder.
Harder?
Mm-hmm. And so, but right now, the way it stands for these types of cases, there's been cases in the past when, and you guys have seen, when we've done discipline for criminal convictions that potentially could have been resolved at a lower means as like a citation, but because they don't have authority to do the citation, they've opted to do discipline in the past. Where you're not necessarily seeing that now, but to your point, I'm not going to be here forever, and you could have EOs who think that they should do discipline because they don't want to close the case, and right now those are the only options that we have, is to either close it or do discipline. And so I think the whole intent is to be able to offer that middle ground to where it's more egregious than closing it educational, less egregious than maybe raising to discipline, and this gets it resolved quicker at a lower level. So that's just, and Tara, I don't know what your thoughts are on the burden issue.
I don't have any thoughts on the burden issue, quite honestly, because at this point, I think that you're in the, weeds on this regulation, and this is really Ms. Halbo's area. I mean, if we want to go back to 2138 and, whether or not the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act is sufficiently covering the practice of veterinary medicine, I'm happy to discuss. But, let me turn this over to Ms. Halbo for her thoughts on this issue.
What we have in 2043, which is what's being amended, is that it would involve violating a statute or regulation relating to the practice of veterinary medicine. So that's the baseline of that. And all we're taking it out is the while engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine. So given it has to be a violation or statute relating to the practice, substantially relating, seems like unnecessary lawyering involved here. And I appreciate that as an advocate, the CVMA is going to be very, oh, wait, we need to protect here. But the point is, there has to be a violation of the statute of regulations, and this allows, it's like, we'd like to give you an arrow in your quiver that doesn't involve going to discipline and truly causing great havoc. We'd like to give you a way to help encourage compliance with something that once it's paid off, it's gone. So that was my understanding of trying to make this happen. But it can always be amended. And if that's what the board wants to do, that can be done.
So I think I'm having a little bit of trouble here in this discussion, because on one hand, I'm hearing from Ms. Halbo that it doesn't make a difference if that's in there or not. And then on the other hand, I'm hearing from Jessica that it does make a difference. It actually just makes it a lesser, it doesn't have to rise to such a high level, and therefore allows for a citation. So I hear one argument that this is the same thing and we just don't have to put the word in there, and then I'm hearing a different argument that this isn't the same thing and it's helping to allow for lesser, for just citations where it doesn't have to go to an accusation. Am I hearing this wrong, or I'm sorry again for I just want to be clear on what's happening here.
Well, how this works is that any citations under this existing language would have to be relating to the practice. And the substantially relating, it's like you're trying to split a hair and like, what type of relating? Is it this high or is it this high? And if it's relating to the practice, it involves a statute or regulation involved in the practice. So is there a difference? Yes, you're adding another term that then changes how the evaluation of the particular action is being seen. And go ahead.
I guess my question to CVMA would be, what statute or regulation are they afraid that this board would attempt to enforce that does not relate to the practice of veterinary medicine? Because they seem very focused on making sure that that statute or regulation that's been violated substantially relates. Why? I mean, what is the regulation or the statute that kind of relates to veterinary medicine
I think
practice?
as a practicing veterinarian myself, and after reading their response, which is one of the reasons we ask for these, right, is so that we can reconsider these before moving forward with legislation, and so that we can hear other opinions and understand maybe some things we haven't thought of before. And so when I read that, it did have me thinking, if there was some sort of something that they were cited for outside of their work, and it was, at a bar, and there was, there was some altercation, and they had, just some sort of a citation there, and it, depending on who is in charge and interpreting that, they could say, well, that is related, that could be related to veterinary medicine because they, they're showing that they have a violent tendency, or, I think that it leaves so much open to interpretation, and we already are held to such a high standard when it comes to our lifestyles and how we hold ourselves in the community, and that we have to obey the laws and such. And so minor violations of the law that are outside of veterinary medicine could be interpreted as related to, in some way because we talk to clients, or, I mean, I think that that's the concern. I think that's my concern. And therefore, when I read this, it did cause me to say, wait a minute, just as a public comment period is supposed to, it's not supposed to be how do we, you know, push that aside. It's supposed to be let's consider these and then think about, okay, well, this may actually impact things in the future that we just didn't think of, and that's my concern. And then when I'm asking the questions and hearing two different viewpoints, one is that, oh, it doesn't matter, it's just that this is a redundant word and we don't want to put it in there because the Office of Regulations is going to say, oh, well, this is just redundant, why do we have this redundant word in there? And then on the other hand, hearing, well, no, it actually is not in there because it does lower the bar and allows us to do these lesser citations, which is better for everybody. That doesn't give me confidence in what we're doing, because I'm not hearing the same thing from you guys. So that's where I'm at. And
Tara, and then I know Grant's here, but go ahead.
I'm looking at the quote from CVMA in here, and it looks like CVMA asked if the intent is to allow the board to levy civil penalties based on criminal and civil violations outside the context of veterinary practice. Criminal conduct, you know, we do have under 4883. You know, if it's shoplifting, a shoplifting misdemeanor, is that relating to the practice of veterinary medicine? I believe the executive officer issuing the citation would have to make that link. If we're talking about it, driving under the influence,
I already have it memorized.
that is regularly
Yeah.
a violation. So that hasn't changed. That's not going to change. It would require a criminal conviction, not in a bar fight, you know, people.
Or even just assault, like not even a physical altercation. But again, this is leaving more room to interpretation. Like, and it's just this whole, it's just relating, or is it substantially relating? And so I think, anyway, I've said a lot, and I'm sorry to hash this out so much. But
if this didn't already cite to a violation of a statute or regulation relating to the practice of veterinary medicine, I would be concerned. Because otherwise it would just be, they can be cited for conduct relating to the practice of veterinary medicine. At that point, yeah, you would need substantially, because just a conduct generally, that's a problem. You want a specific tie-in to how does that conduct relate to this board and the consumers that we protect. However, the citations regulation, it specifically requires a violation of the statute or the regulation relating to the practice. So I don't think we need substantially, because it is a higher burden to prove. We already have specific statutes and regulations everywhere. It's like, you know, written that we refer to, regardless of whether or not Jessica Sieferman is the executive officer at this time or some other executive officer, they still have to go to the written law to issue that citation. So I'm just trying to provide more context. They have to have violated a law, a statute or a regulation. If we're talking about a crime that this board can discipline a licensee for, it does have to be related to the practice of veterinary medicine, but there also has to be a conviction of that crime. So it's not just they got arrested and then we're going to cite them for it. There has to be a conviction, because that's what the Practice Act says. We can discipline people for criminal convictions. So it's, you know, I get the sense that it's
cite them just for,
After
like,
the
we can cite them, they might be convicted, but if
Nobody can hear you.
but now it's like, it doesn't have to be substantially related. It has, it would just be, well, it might be related in this, because that's the statute already, that they have a conviction of some sort, and then it's up to the interpretation of whoever to say, whoever is in charge, to say this is related versus substantially related. Okay, I'm going to stop.
If it's a criminal conviction, staff is going to 2040 rehabilitation criteria, 2041 and 2040. What is substantially related for a crime? And then how is this person demonstrating rehabilitation? How old was that criminal conviction? What's the nature of it? What mitigating evidence has the licensee provided to the board that shows, this is never going to happen again? They're not actually a danger to the public. Those are the other considerations that are going into this. But if it's a DUI, most likely that's probably not a citation, because most DUIs involve, more egregious conduct that we're really concerned about the practice on animals and the danger to the public. So, I want to be clear that most criminal convictions are looked at with the other regulations, not automatic citation. They're reviewed for that substantial relationship criteria, and then they're reviewed for that rehabilitation. So in civil conduct, what are we talking about? That was one of the concerns of CVMA. Civil conduct, is that the bar fight with no criminal conviction? Or is that just somebody got sued for fraud? I mean, I don't know what civil actions means, but unless it's a violation, there's a statute and a regulation relating to the practice of veterinary medicine, this board wouldn't cite for that. Just, random civil conduct. Like, we tie it to a statute and a regulation because the regulation requires that. So
you said wouldn't cite, but couldn't cite is right. We could not cite for those.
Right.
I just want to clarify, because I'm confused too. Okay. All right, Dr. Miller.
All right. So a lot of my answer was actually already answered by Dr. Bradbury, because her thought process was very similar to ours. So first off, apologies in the way this letter was written. I think that we can do a little bit better next time in making sure we write a letter that doesn't result in more questions than answers. Also, no insult was meant for anyone here. The fact is that we're not always going to have Jessica Seiferman and Tara Welsh here. And the fact is that in the past, we have had much different people here. And that is something that, from CVMA's perspective, we see things the way we see things because of certain occurrences that have happened in the past. And what we've learned through our years of helping write legislation and regulations and monitoring these things is that it all comes down to the words, what's written here. And as Karen had mentioned earlier about OAL wanting to be very careful about what we write in regulations, we too would like to be very clear and careful about what we write in regulations. Every section of this act is subject to interpretation to some degree. In the current structure, if Jessica feels that there is a criminal conviction, and we're sorry for you saying the word civil, that was a mistake, we're sorry for that. But if there's something criminal that might rise to a level that would require board disciplinary action, in this current structure, Jessica takes that to the Attorney General, who acts as an advisor to her, and then that goes to an administrative law judge, who's an impartial third party. But in the cite and fine structure, it is first the accusation, then the citation, which is public record. And then, if the licensee chooses to, they can go and appeal that to an administrative law judge. So you're changing a process over to vest more authority in the executive officer. And any time we're doing that, we want to be very careful about making sure that we know what those rules are, because we have seen executive officers before get a little bit artistic with their interpretation of some of these regulations. Not this one, not this officer, but this officer is probably going to be more successful in her career at some point, and we won't have her here anymore. So we want to make sure that the words that are left here are ones that can serve all of us to make sure that we can clearly understand what this is. So, for instance, 2040, we have, by the way, reviewed everything, and your reference to 4883 in terms of violating federal statute is specifically in relation to controlled substance diversion or abuse. But in 2040, if you read 2040, there is room for interpretation in 2040 as well. And so if we can keep things synonymous, if we can keep it clear, the term substantially related does have a legal precedent. We know that DUIs are substantially related. How do we know that? Because there have been court case decisions prior that shows that somebody's judgment or lack thereof in getting behind the wheel of a car drunk can translate into their judgment or lack thereof in medically managing cases. That is substantially related. That is a legal terminology that has been established in a court of law. So we want to make sure that that carries through all sections of the law to avoid ambiguity. We fight, how much time do we spend cleaning up ambiguous language in our law that at some point in time everyone understood it when it was written, but then here we are 15 years later and it's lost its meaning. Nancy and I were having a talk last night about the VCPR language, that when it was written, the intention of the VCPR language was totally different than how it's being interpreted today. So we want to be clear. That's what we're asking for. We want clarity so that everyone can understand what it is we need to be doing. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Grant, while you're still there, can I ask Jessica, way back when, the initial goal of dealing with this, addressing this, was to have a different route for ones that would normally have to go through the disciplinary process and probation and all the additional requirements of a probationary thing.
Awesome
to
intention.
be able, to be able to do a cite and fine when you know there's education and it's a one-time situation and all those other things to make it simpler for everyone and a faster process as well. And frankly, easier on also the practitioner, I would assume. But Mike, I got a little confused, and Jessica, adding substantially in, are you, Jessica, and maybe none of us really know here because we're talking through this so much, adding the word substantially, would that defeat the purpose of this, meaning you would not be able to do these citations and we'd have to go back into the whole disciplinary route for some of these things, or would it? That's one of my questions, I guess.
So at the time that this was proposed, there were a number of accusations that were pending, or maybe a proposed decision from a judge related to certain actions by either applicants or licensees regarding, say, petty theft from 20 years ago, or failing to disclose something on a medical record, or not medical record, on an application, where discipline was taken. Right. And during that time, as you guys recall, I spent quite a bit of time going back and forth with the DAGs and the SDAGs about why those should not have occurred. Right. And trying to understand, because I do think the people before me had good intentions, I'm trying to understand why they took the actions that they took. And perhaps it's because at the time, and you all know, the documentation wasn't the greatest to try to understand why decisions were made when it came to discipline. The only thing that makes sense to me is that perhaps they thought that it was more egregious than just closing the case, and their only options were to do discipline. And I think that while engaging in practices is unique to this healing arts boards, it's not in other limitations in other healing arts boards, because you have the statutory authority already to issue a citation for any violation in the act. And so that's kind of where this came. And on top of that, one of the things that Senator Pan during sunset hearings always brought up was, what is the board doing when it comes to continuing education and the audits, and what ramifications do you guys have if they fail to do the continuing education? And right now, the only ramification we have is discipline. And so that's also a concern of mine, because I don't think we need to do discipline for everybody who may not have been the most honest or maybe didn't understand the requirements. So we want to be able to do something at a lower level through a citation. I'm concerned that substantially related will increase the burden on these citations where the intent of a citation is for the lower level violation. So that's...
So thank you for that, and we recognize that you are trying to streamline things and you're trying to do a good thing. We get that. But when you look at the substantially related criteria, it says that you have to consider the nature and gravity of the offense, the number of years elapsed since the date of the offense, and the nature and duties of the profession in which the applicant seeks licensure. When you're talking about lying about CE, that's right up the bowling lane of this is directly related to the practice of veterinary medicine. There's no question with that. The question comes from what Dr. Bradbury had mentioned, which is, what happens if I walk outside this building and somebody attacks me? And by the nature of who I am, I get the upper hand in that. But in the end of all of it, he who has most bruises wins, and there's some kind of a court thing, and there it goes. We all know that the court system isn't fair. We all know that it discriminates. It's not perfect. So here it opens up this larger swath. So what you're mentioning are very clean cases of, yeah, a DUI, we get it. Lying about your CE. Some of the other examples that Jeff mentioned, which of course my notepad's in the back, sure, that makes total sense. But when you don't write substantially related, which is what's written in 2043, there's a far bigger swath out there. And there are people out there who don't think like you do. I have seen them.
And I think, too, I mean, that example that you provided, there's no violation of the actual statute or regulation. So unless, like what Tara was saying, there's a conviction, then that becomes a violation and the problem.
I disagree. So I feel like if I'm convicted of some bodily injury to some other person, even though the circumstances might be that I'm acting in self-defense, but that never gets outlined, an executive officer could say, geez, you know, it really demonstrates a level of anger that might not be consistent with what we want to see in a medical licensee. And I think that that really warrants something. That's where things can get a little bit tricky. So we want to put up the clearest, most accurate language that we can to make this synonymous with other parts of the law. I feel like the wording, there's nothing wrong with what we've asked to do. It is within the Practice Act. It is everything that you're already saying. So please just add the language, and that way 20 years from now, we won't have to be back at this table again trying to explain what the concept of it was when we decided to do this.
Okay, one of the things I was kind of persuaded by was when Tara talked about when you issue a citation, you've got to cite the violations. In your example, I'm kind of going to myself, well, where is the violation in the well, it's a criminal conviction, but there has to be some nexus, I believe, to the Practice Act and right. So I keep thinking there's protections against that. I know what you're saying is you can never guarantee anything for sure.
So
I get that.
Right. So
I guess
4883 has but not limited to in it, which means anything.
Yeah.
So we really would like you to consider the language that we've requested. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and I guess if we did add it and that limited you, we'd be still back to discipline for a lot of cases. If that's, so it wouldn't have the positive effect, but it wouldn't hurt anything per se.
Yeah.
Yes, Diana. And then,
This is very long, but it's great. A conversation on substantial feels very lawyerly. I mean, I feel that the spirit of this was, in fact, to discipline less people and have the option to cite people for lesser types of actions that don't rise to the level of disciplining. With that said, adding substantial does add a higher level of burden, right? It is changing the burden, and I think takes away from the spirit of what our intent was to not discipline and then revoke licenses and go through all of that, and instead cite someone. And I see here as I'm looking at the, one of the concerns that CVMA is that the board staff does not have the training to assess whether a civil or criminal conviction occurring outside of the practice of veterinary medicine. I guess I'm going to the training to assess. I mean, frankly, there isn't been training to assess substantial or not, right? It is subjective, the subjectivity in general of substantiality or not substantiality is going to be subjective to whoever is on the board or whoever is serving at any point in time. And so I think going to the spirit of what we wanted was less discipline, less revoking of licenses or putting on probation, is actually more favorable to the CVMA versus than not. And so I understand not including substantial. I get the concerns, but I think that the spirit of this was actually to reduce discipline and help veterinarians versus to be citing left and right veterinarians.
Tara.
I'd also just want to clarify that their citations have the benefit of 4875.6, which authorizes persons who are cited to appeal the citation in two different ways. One, they can request an informal hearing with the executive officer to discuss the merits of the citation, and at that time, the executive officer can dismiss it or modify it or affirm it. And in any, if it's affirmed or modified, then the licensee still has the option of requesting a formal hearing, and then it goes through to an ALJ. It goes through the usual APA process. So a citation has more leeway in resolving the alleged violations than waiting to do a formal disciplinary action, and that's when an accusation is filed. You don't have the same early methods of informal hearing to resolve the matter.
Thank you. I didn't realize that. Thank you. All right. Do we have a motion here? Trying to see where we are on this. I mean, obviously, we know all our intentions are good here. It's just getting the language kind of dialed in. Jamie, Dr. Nolan.
Well, I'm going to be very transparent and admit that I feel like I'm drowning. I look like I'm a little over my head here. We're really throwing a lot of different, regulations around. I haven't been able to keep up with all of the argument, looking at each one of them again. I thought I had a pretty good understanding of this, but now I feel like I don't. And so I guess I'm asking, what is the timeline? This was actually supposed to be voting on the responses to the that we got during the public, period. What's the timeline? Do we have more time, to do this, or will this, if we don't, vote on these responses or modify our proposal, then what happens?
Good question. I'm sorry, say it again.
About the timeline of the reg.
The timeline of the reg process is we would need to, if there's going to be a modification, we need to understand exactly where you're putting in substantially, and with this term substantially related, and make that clear. Then the board votes on adopting that language, and it can be sent out for a 15-day public comment period, and then the final documents, and then you respond to any comments that you have and see if the board wants to make changes. It'll take a little bit longer, it'll go further, but the board needs to decide, and what the board wants to do is what we want to do. I'm your reg counsel. I don't really have a dog in this fight. And I'm sorry, that's a wrong phrase to use with the vet med board. I apologize. But it would be, if we're not able to clarify what sort of modification is wanted at this meeting, then it doesn't move forward until the next meeting where we've got written up what the language is and what the changes are. If you can look in your packet on the page where this section is for civil penalties, you want to look and see if you're wanting to add substantially related just to the Class A violation. I mean, where are you wanting to put that, and how do you want to adjust this? It just is gonna, it takes more time, and I don't know if that's a concern or not.
Jamie has another hand up, but Tara, did you want to respond to Karen's real quick?
No, I just wanted to add to the conversation that I was trying to quickly do some research as to what the other boards may be doing with their citations, and some, it appears, relate to the practice of they don't have substantial, but other boards specifically list the specific code sections that are the violations that have, a dollar amounts associated with those violations. So there's different ways of doing this. Clearly, one of them is going to be a lot more onerous than what we're proposing right now, but there are other boards that don't have substantially related to. They require a citation to the alleged violation, and then they have to relate to the practice of that profession.
Okay. Dr. Nolan.
So just to clarify, Christina, I'm asking you this question. It seems like we're still talking about removing the phrase engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine, but you're talking about adding substantially in front of the related to comment right behind that. Is that what you're feeling? I'm assuming that's what the CVMA is saying, but again, it's getting a little unclear to me.
Yeah, I guess I was wanting to talk about it for sure, which is what we've done here. And I just wanted to be clear. I wasn't trying to be adversarial here. I just wanted more clarity on what we're doing and why. But, I think it is difficult for me so yes, what you're saying is correct. I was suggesting we add substantially to it. I do understand Diana's point, and, I think that that's also a good point. So I'm struggling with this. I kind of feel like you do, Jamie, in that, like, I feel like I thought I understood it all, then I read that letter, it made me reconsider things, it made me think about other implications of it. I don't have the same grasp of all of the different regulations as Dr. Miller and Tara and Jessica and all, and so it's and there are, just in front of us, there's two interpretations of how this can be interpreted. So I feel similar to you. I'm not sure, because I want us to be able to write citations instead of just, accusations. And I don't want to limit that by adding a higher level, but at the same time, I know that we are not going to be the board forever, and so that does concern me. So that's a long answer to your question, but yes, it was to add substantially related. I'm also not opposed to what you were, I think, thinking when you asked your last question, which was, can we table it and have time to digest it and then come back, since this is, we're looking at law here.
Well, in the interest of time, because it's now 3:30, I'm reading what we actually proposed in the proposed regulatory language, and I think if we're going to go the substantially route, I don't know that we're ready to do that right now, clearly, unless Tara is, and maybe we do have to postpone this. The goal of this, we all understand, is we're all in favor of the goal of this, it's just how to accomplish it. So I know where I am, but I think there's a lot of confusion on the board. Yes, Karen?
Well, in section 2043, subdivision A, which is the Class A violations, you have Class A violations involve a person who, we're taking out while engaged in the practice of veterinary medicine, has violated a statute or regulation relating to, you would replace relating
Here.
to substantially related.
Right here.
Yeah, no, I know.
That would be the modification. I don't believe you would change or add substantial to Class B violations because they involve harm to an animal patient, and it's clearly related. We don't need that extra language. But if you wanted to make the change, the board could strike in subdivision A of 2043, has violated a statute or regulation substantially related to the practice of veterinary medicine. And if that modification of text is what the board would want to do, you could vote for that modification, and then we would send out a 15-day. And if there are no comments, then, or no, not just no comments, no negative comments, concerns expressed versus, oh boy, we like this, then Jessica could proceed with finalizing the regulation. And if that is the modification you want to make, then you would say you've reviewed the comments, and the discussion here should form the basis for the responses to comments. You're not required in the final documents to vote on the responses to comments. You are required to review the comments received, and I think you have evidence of that with this hearing or this meeting. So, so if that is the modification you want to make, that can be done.
Right.
And if we want to move faster, I would ask you to do it.
Thank you. And I guess if we did that, the only potential side effect ultimately is that perhaps some of the things that might get cited would not be cited, and they'd have to move to disciplinary, but that's because of the substantial caveat. But I think we don't know for sure, right, Jessica? So it's, okay. All right, is there a motion to amend this language?
Sure, I'll make the motion to amend the language to include substantially relating to the practice of veterinary medicine in 2043A.
Second?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, I have to put that in here.
So then it would be a motion to modify the text in 2043A to replace the term relating with the term substantially related, and to direct staff to prepare and send out a 15-day modification of text, and instruct the executive officer, if there are no negative comments, to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking process, and authorize the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package. The board would be adopting the text as modified with this motion. So it's to adopt the modified text and send it out for a 15-day. And if there are concerns or negative comments, it will come back to the board.
Thank you. And I assume you're fine with the addition of that. I'll second the motion. Is there any discussion from the board members before we open this to public comment again? Jamie, no. Jennifer, no. All right, then now we have the motion on the floor to amend this. Do we have any public comment from the room? Sure. I seconded it, sorry. Seeing none from the room, moderator, could you please open it up?
Thank you, Madam Board President. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or simply raise your hand. And please remember that you have a 3-minute limit. I'll give you a 15-second warning. And Bonnie Lutz, I see your hand is up, so you should be able to unmute yourself. And you're unmuted.
Bonnie, we can't hear you.
Yes, we can barely hear you, Bonnie. All right, she muted herself. Bonnie, you should be able to unmute yourself again if you want to try another time. We can, but you're still pretty soft. If you have a microphone, you might want to get close to it.
Can you hear me now better?
That's better.
Okay, great. Okay, I was going to try to stay quiet and not take up your time with this. Couple of things, just.
Bonnie, we still can't
years.
really hear you. Can you turn the volume up on your phone maybe, or yell into it, or yell at us?
I'm trying to, I don't have my phone, I have my
That's
computer.
it. Now we can hear you.
Okay, all right. So I've been doing this 22 years. I do think that there's something called, historical memory. And I am really concerned about, I think it's the reasons you have today for making these changes and not adding substantially related are really good reasons. But I think we need to add that language. Now, I know it's been proposed that you add it, but only to Section A. However, I think it needs to be added to Section B, because Section B does not limit a Class B violation to where a harm to an animal has happened, but it says, or has committed a violation which meets the criteria for a Class A violation and has 2 or more citations for Class A violations within the 5-year period. So my comment is that if you're going to add substantially relating in Section A, you need to add that to Section B as well, because you do have Section B, subsection 3 to contend with. And again, I think, with the fact that memories do fade when the board changes and the executive officer changes, that it's really important that we have consistent language in the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, if we have no more comments, poor Jeffrey. You don't have any comments, do you? Just kidding. From board members, then I think maybe we could proceed to a vote.
Ms. Bowler?
Aye.
Dr. Bradbury?
Yes.
Ms. Laredo?
Abstain.
Dr. Noland?
Yes.
Ms. Prado?
Yes.
And so we have only 4 voting members, 1 abstaining. Do we have any quorum issue if she decides not to vote?
If you only have 5, you need 3 members to take it back.
So we're okay?
Yep.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
So then my next question is, because that's related to the responses that CVMA rose, do you want to, Karen said they don't have to approve the proposed responses for the other 2, but I just wanted to see if you had any concerns about the proposed responses to the other 2 comments.
I personally did not on the other 2 comments. I think that those are fine. But Jamie, Jennifer, Diana, no? These are the 2 responses additional to this CVMAs. Okay.
All right, we can go back to 10A.
All right.
So back to 10A with the next package, which is related to the RVT education. I know you guys had discussed earlier today about moving forward with 2068.5, and I will be pushing that one forward as the next part of the process. With that, going down to the uniform standards for substance abusing licensees. That one I did get back from budgets, and they did request additional documentation, so I will be giving that to them within the next few weeks. So we'll be going forward with that. Next one after that is the shelter minimum standards. The background on this package was it was worked on last in April of 2019, which included 2 new proposed regulations. First one was to establish common standards, similar to the other minimum standards, such as lighting, sanitary, surgery room requirements, reference materials, stuff like that in this package. And the second part was also to establish supervisory duties to the veterinarian and to the RVTs and the veterinary assistants within an animal shelter setting. I will be reviewing that package as well. I also know that the other minimum standards is being reviewed, I believe, with the MDC at this point as well. So we do have those. The next one is the veterinary student exemption and the RVT examination eligibility. This one has to do with basically future veterinarians who are within 2 years of earning their degree, having the ability to have that RVT license during that time period. Within the last 2 years of their degree to become eligible to take the VTNA. I'll be reviewing this package. I know that when I looked at it last, it did reference areas such as the California veterinary technician exam, which will have to be, gutted out because we can no longer give that exam, no longer required. So I will be reviewing that as well. The next one after that is the minimum standards for alternary premises. That one, again, is with the MDC for their review. I believe they're going to streamline that and reduce some of the redundant language between the various different types of veterinary premises to kind of get that a little bit smoother as well. So.
I'm just going to add a little more to the minimum standards for alternate veterinary premises. During the last board meeting, we had it up for discussion, but then there was concerns from the regulation unit about the language that was approved and the concerns about a lot of even though the way that it was structured, they were taking copy and paste from existing law and making it separate sections for each alternative premises. The concern is existing law itself would never have passed muster with OAL. And so we would have to then justify every single issue, which was basically everything in current law, to do it that way. And there was a lot of concerns that it would still not be successful, which I tend to agree with. And so what we essentially have to do, and which you have asked the MDC to look at already, but maybe not to this extent, was we have to restructure the entire rulemaking package in a way that doesn't repeat existing law and it keeps existing law as much as possible. So we would hopefully still do the intent of what the MDC and the board had in the beginning, but just in a totally different way of getting there. So.
And so part of the final thing, I know 2 of the regulation packages were removed from this list, and first one would have been the eligibility evaluation to take the NAVLE. Since the applicants can now just apply directly and take the NAVLE, we have removed that package, so there's no longer that going to be on the list. The other one was the VCPR informed client consent. This had to do with the telemedicine package. And since we don't have statutory regulations or statutory laws out there, we have shelved this for now and taken it off the list until they actually have a statute that comes out there. So.
Is that, does that go back to the definitions that we were trying to get into the omnibus bill, which you didn't this year, but we're gonna look for a
Yeah.
off next year?
Yeah,
Is that
so
correct?
once we had the legislation in effect, then it would show up on the active rulemaking packages. But right now, it's not something that is currently being worked on or even really in existence at this point. We just decided we try to take it off because otherwise it looks like it's a pending workload that we're supposed to be actively working, and it's not. So, but as soon as if and when we get that legislation and it becomes effective, then you'd see it come back on this list.
Yep. And if you guys have any questions, or if the board has any questions, concerns?
I was just gonna say, typically, I mean, we've seen this grid, the
Yeah.
spreadsheet,
It's
where it
smaller.
goes page after page, and the fact that we only have 6 or 7 in here is amazing. Do we have any that we are about to start? I mean, it seems like we do, but,
So
or that we are,
I think that there's definitely room for improvement in multiple regs still, but I would like to first get through this before starting new ones.
and nothing we're required to by law, is
Correct.
right? Okay, I kept thinking there was something that we were required to continue to do, and maybe it was blood bank or whatever, but it maybe doesn't apply.
So I know that there was some confusion when it came to both 1885 and 1282, because there's mentions about putting in regulations and references department, but in both instances, those are not related to the board creating the regulations. It was either CDFA doing regulations or the Bureau of Cannabis Control.
Okay. All right, anyone have any questions for Jeff? I don't think so. Thank you. Well, do I need to open public comment?
Sure, about the whole thing.
Okay, for the regulatory report. All right, now we'll open to public comment and folks in the room that haven't already commented. And then I do see someone coming up. All right.
So just as just to make sure I have this right, so in relation to the minimum standards regulations for the alternate premises, OAL has already looked at they have not already looked at those, but there's been an anticipation that OAL will find those to be redundant.
Not necessarily, yes, redundant, but also I think the biggest concern was existing law that was copied and pasted into those other sections are vague and ambiguous, and you would have to go through each and every word and explain and further define what those words mean, because that's the concern. And maybe Karen can elaborate more, but it was essentially existing law would not pass OAL now.
So that means we have to then go back to our regular minimum standards for the 3 existing sets we have now and redo those as well?
So what the plan is there's a document from, it looks like 2015, that Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Grant put together from
Dana Grant.
NDC, where it talks about what the intent was, what they want for each premises, and then it mirrored back to where they got it from existing law. And so the plan is now to have my team work with NDC and Dr. Sullivan, probably reach out to Dr. Grant as well, but to look at existing law and see where we might need to just put either exemptions into that or or add to it without changing existing law as much as possible. Okay. So we're gonna have to go back and do a comparison document. My team's already working on that, but essentially start over.
Okay, so that original task force was a CVMA task force, and we were asked by the board to form that task force. The lion's share of the work done was by Dana Grant, who is also Dana Wiedenkeller, Dr. Grant's wife.
Right.
We probably have the comparison document because we started with existing law and then used it as a template to try to build out each new premises type that we had been able to identify. So we may be able to assist there. I will tell you, though, that the redundancy portion was debated extensively, and we opted to create the redundancy because of the user-friendliness of the regs in relation to those who are reading them. So if you are a house call veterinarian, it makes a lot of sense to be able to go to a section that says house call and read it. Now, we know that most of that section is synonymous with all the other sections, but if you want people to comply and you want them to understand the act and you don't want to be flipping around pages like we just did for 3 hours, it helps to make it a user-friendly approach, which is why we chose to do that.
And I think from our perspective, we understand that intent, and so we're trying to do it that way as much as possible, to where it might just be that another section, but instead of repeating everything, it just references back to that initial set, and then say what don't apply or what does apply. You know what I'm saying?
I do, because I wrote that. So I was tasked with that, to slice it and dice it both ways, and I believe I have that document.
The other one, because I have the one from Dr. Sullivan, Dr. Grant.
That might be mine.
We can
Okay.
talk.
All right. We've done extensive work on that. It's really disheartening to hear that it's going to be held up longer, because obviously there are so many divergent practice types now that are really trying to apply the existing rules as they feel they can, but it is just so important that we get that moving. So I'm really sorry to hear that it's going to be a while longer.
It won't take another 5 years, I can tell you that. I promise you.
Not. I got to retire at some point.
But we're gonna get it done.
All right, thank you.
I don't think there's any more public comment in the room, so moderator, would you mind opening?
Thank you, Madam Board President. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no request for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you very much. Didn't know you'd be up here for a year, did you? No. All right, now we're to our student liaisons, and I want to, Mandy's sitting here from UC Davis, but also I did introduce Allie. I'm not sure if you were there. Should we text her to make sure? Allie, if you could make sure you're there. Yep. There you are. Okay. Thank you. Hi. Welcome. And I wanted to also thank Christina Jurgens from Western. Has moved on. I think her class schedule this year didn't allow for her to continue as our liaison, but to really thank her very much. She and Mandy were our first, and we're very excited to have you both here, and welcome, Allie. So I'll turn to Mandy, excuse me, Ayers from UCD.
Yeah, talk about being in over your head. All right, so Davis is in the midst of a couple of restructuring projects. I think I told you guys in the past that with our new dean, Dean Stetter, he has this big strategic plan, which you can find online. I have it pulled up. And one of the projects is this all-species imaging center. But there were a couple of smaller projects along the way that I wasn't aware of until this past summer. They just completed 3 new Marin Foal stalls at the school, which is fantastic. So now we have a separate NICU and Marin Foal stalls instead of kind of a multi-purpose NICU. And then I believe this December, they'll be finishing up the new emergency room and intensive care unit for small animal and the new cardiology service room, examination rooms. And then they've got a couple of larger projects that are more in the service of equine, so they'll be working towards building the performance center. We have one, we just need an updated one so that we can kind of match some of the other schools' facilities. As I've been going around the country for all of different conventions, symposiums, things like that, I've realized that there are a few things that we are in the midst of catching up on, one of which being having the physical therapy pool for horses, having them be able to use water treadmills and things like that. So good things to come. We are making progress on that, luckily, because we would like to not have our water get shut off anymore. I work in surgery, so it's a passion project. One of the other things that we're doing is our student body is trying to organize an inter-school competition with Washington State. So we're going to be doing a 5K this upcoming, I believe, December, trying to increase school communication, which brings me to another point. So I attended VLE in June, which I was not able to report on in July. Unfortunately, my externship schedule got away from me. But one of the things that we discussed a lot at VLE, which is veterinary leadership experience, is that there is this isolation of schools where basically like schools are their own island and no one talks to each other. Part of it is this like idea that every veterinary school is competing against every other one, which doesn't help. You know that they release yearly rankings, which means Davis is basically ostracized. No one wants to talk to us, but because we're so high up. But basically, we just all we're trying to come up with ideas to get our schools to communicate better. So, bridging with what we were discussing earlier with the AVSB with Dr. Nunez, something that hasn't happened in a very long time is having a West Coast school host the SAVMA Symposium. So that's something that I am working on for like very passionately. So I basically the process to host symposium is this long, arduous thing. So the way that it would work is we would basically be hosting in 2025, which is my graduating year. So it'd be like right before I go out. It's always in March. And we would be presenting our proposal at this upcoming symposium in March. So it basically is going to be a 30-page document listing all of our facilities, wet labs, speakers, convention centers, fun things to do for people at, you know, in Sacramento at night. Yeah, because everyone wants some like place to go out for drinks. And from then on, like, we'll have to get approval from CVMA. You guys will be hearing from me shortly. And we have to get the dean's approval, and then we have to present it and hope that nobody else has anything better. But I don't believe California has had symposium in many years. Davis hosted in 2011, and I believe that was the last time anything has been farther west than Minnesota and Kansas. So yeah, and as someone from Kansas, I was like, hey, like, why are we, come on, let's bring it out. So the other schools are pretty excited about it. They want to be somewhere that's not cold, because usually March in, you know, Minnesota was, I believe it got down to -3 while we were there. So the other schools are very excited about that.
Mandy, I think the board, we'd definitely be interested in being a presenter too. So if you can add that in there, we'd love to present what happened.
I was planning on using that. So I may even be asking for a letter of support. It's not really a letter of recommendation, and I'll be contacting you guys separately about that. But essentially, we have to get not the governor's approval, but we do have to get the state veterinary medical association's approval. Our board, oh no, his talking about us coming down. And then we have to have our local chapter as well. All of the students have to be on board because this takes a lot of planning. So.
I'm just sitting in the seat further away from Tara, but if the symposium is substantially related to the practice of veterinary medicine, then we'll support it. Too soon?
I have a pen right here. Just throw it.
Also, I guess the public doesn't necessarily know. Dr. Miller was, he had to review my performance in a lab recently. He volunteered, and I was in his group. So, anyways. Yeah, no, it's okay. I passed. Okay, so that's a big thing that's going on right now. But I wanted to mention that, especially in light of what we were talking about, having the West Coast be more integrated into the rest of the veterinary world. I mean, part of it is the fact that we are physically distant, but that's what planes are for. So that's a big thing going on. Another big thing that's happening, which kind of goes back to one of our earlier agenda points, is we have a group of equine students who, separate from CVMA, CVMB, decided on their own that they were going to form a task force of sorts to talk about what we're doing in veterinary school that is dissuading students from joining equine practice. So I'm helping them a little bit. They're mostly third years. they're having a lot of conversations about the language that's being used by faculty and professors. Things to the effect of, oh yeah, this is something horses get a lot because they try to kill themselves, or this is something we see a lot in horses because they're not built well. May all be true, but it has been feedback that we've gotten that students hear that and they're like, well, then why would I work with horses if they're constantly, trying to just jump out of trailers and do whatever else. So that is mobilizing to some degree. We're trying to just essentially start that conversation about why it is that students don't want to go into equine practice to begin with, let alone once they get into equine practice, being worried about losing their licensing. That's the whole racetrack conversation that I don't need to get into because I don't know anything about it. But that's a conversation that we're having. And then the last thing I want to talk about is, so we did, I believe I told Jessica, and hopefully it got reported, that we had a big Brave Space Purdue University. It's a DEI courses. They're both separate DEI courses, one offered through AVMA, one offered, I believe, through Purdue University. And so we had 50 students participate in Purdue. I don't know how many participated in Brave Space since it is offered through SAVMA as a part of your membership. But we had at least 100 students involved in total. And one of the things that we talked about in Brave Space is domestic violence, which domestic violence is actually this month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So one of the projects that I'm going to work on in my local chapter with a bunch of other students is they have free posters that you can put into hospitals. So we're going to try to get as many hospitals in the area as we can to post those just in bathrooms, because there was this crazy story that they show as a part of the Brave Space training program of a woman who comes in and like slips a note to the veterinary staff, and the veterinary staff actually get her help. And this all happened in a veterinary hospital. So that's something that I personally am going to try to incorporate into Davis. So yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your proposal. I know how extensive they are, but I know you'll do a great job, and SAVMA will be coming here in 2025, right? All right, Allie, I'm going to turn to you. Welcome to the board. Thank you very much for being our liaison for, I'm sorry, could I think it's the moderator controlling this, the WebEx folks, move Allie to the top of the screen? I guess it's speaker thing.
Yeah, the list of attendee little box is actually over Allie's face. So if we can just move that box so we can see her.
Yeah, I'm seeing her on my laptop, but.
Is it better now? This is the moderator.
There you go.
Now
it's better.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you very
you're
much.
welcome.
Ready?
All right. Welcome, Allie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Since I'm new to the group today, and this is my very first meeting, I thought it was pertinent to briefly introduce myself and tell you a little bit about why I'm really excited to be here today and be a part of this team. As Madam Board President Ballard noted, I usually go by Allie, but my full name is Alexandra Ponke, and I'm a current second-year veterinary student at the Western University of Health Sciences down in Southern California. I'm actually a San Francisco Bay Area native, though, and before starting veterinary school, I studied human biology at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where I also worked simultaneously in biomedical research for 3 years. In addition, I also founded, owned, and operated an expansive equine training business for 15 years. I've served multiple roles, including client representative or client service representative, technician assistant, administrative assistant, and practice manager in sectors of both human medicine and veterinary medicine, and within fields that include skilled nursing, general, small, and large animal practice in both the ambulatory and brick and mortar practice settings, as well as emergency and critical care. Presently, I am the president of my institution's Veterinary Business Management Association, and I also occupy several executive board positions um, at Western U in groups such as the Student Veterinary Emergency and Critical Care Society, the student chapter of the American Association of Equine Practitioners, the student chapter of American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior, as well as the student chapter of the American College of Veterinary Pathologists. And I'm also a regular DVM student volunteer within my local and surrounding communities. Personally, I'm highly invested and very dedicated to the VMB's mission to protect the California consumers and their animals through the regulation of vet med. And I also have a personal and deep-rooted interest in the mental and emotional health and welfare of our industry professionals. So I'm also especially interested in the VMB's diversion program. Further, I am very interested in helping improve access to care, and more long-term, my personal goal is to play an integral role in helping improve the entity through large-scale business ownership, management, and consulting ventures, where the main aim would be to optimize and expand veterinary care opportunities and services to patients and the families that love them. Accordingly, I'm also really excited for the opportunity to learn more about the current VMB laws and policies and to take this knowledge back with me to Western U to share with my peers. And ultimately, I'm just glad to have the privilege to actively engage in the current discussions at hand. So next, I'd like to share some of the recent updates more specific to Western U. First, I wanted to begin with a COVID update. At present, all of the courses at Western U have resumed almost entirely in person, although the administration is still requiring the use of N95 or equivalent face coverings to be worn during all curricular and/or extracurricular activities that are held on the campus. And second, I was excited to announce that Dr. Diane McClure, DVM, PhD, and DACLAM, was actually elected to the California Veterinary Medical Board of Governors as an at-large member. And Dr. McClure's first meeting as a board member actually took place earlier this month at the CVMA's quarterly meeting in Palm Springs, and she was one of 4 new board members for the organization, which also included its first RVT. Next, Western U has initiated a national search for a new College of Veterinary Medicine dean following the resignation of Dr. Philip D. Nelson, DVM and PhD, who actually joined the College of Vet Med at Western U in 2005 and served as the dean from 2007 up until this last August. At present, Western U did name Dr. John Texas, MA, VMD, and DAB, VT, as the interim dean for the College of Vet Med. And that was effective September 1st of this year, and that he will hold the position until the institution finds a permanent replacement. Next, Western U's East Veterinary Center actually joined the citywide spay and neuter campaign, in which we've partnered with several organizations, those including the Los Angeles Animal Services Team, the Mitchelson Found Animals Foundation, and the Los Angeles Chargers Impact Fund to provide spay and neuter surgeries to the local animal shelters and the rescue organizations. And the aim is that these services are helping the organizations recover following the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, paired with our very well-known current national shortage of veterinary professionals. And so far, reports have indicated that these efforts have significantly lessened the strain on those organizations by reducing their backlogs of the pets that were awaiting these procedures. And ultimately, the associated underwriting programs are hoping to eradicate unnecessary companion animal euthanasia via improving access to these spay and neuter services and simultaneously promote pet adoption with them as well. Western U also has some exciting larger scale events planned in the near future, so the next couple of months. First, our SAVMA chapter has partnered with Not One More Vet to host a virtual symposium about imposter syndrome in veterinary medicine. And I'm excited to highlight that we've actually invited several other West Coast colleges of vet med to join us in this event. Secondly, our Student Veterinary Emergency and Critical Care Society has also partnered with our college's public health committee in the disaster relief sector in order to host another symposium about emergency veterinary care services during small and large scale disaster situations and how current DVM students can get involved now and then potentially later in their professional careers. And lastly, one that is very near and dear to my heart is the Western U's Veterinary Business Management Association partnership with several of the other West Coast colleges of vet med to host a large annual symposium and summit this coming January. And some of our topics, our main topics that we'd like to cover in this at this event are going to include things like the recommendation of and the use of cannabis in veterinary practice, the current barriers to spectrum of care, especially as they relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion in veterinary medicine, and how the current DVM students might be able to engage in DEI conversation, as well as ultimately help them move the industry forward in a positive and progressive way. And lastly, how to drive change in our industry overall and inspire other people to do the same on both a small and large scale aspect. And lastly, I did want to address a previous inquiry from the board about our institution's educational philosophy regarding access to care from a student perspective, and whether or not the current students at Western U felt like they were being taught simply the gold standard of medicine versus a greater and more flexible spectrum of care. So because our program is very student driven and operated in a problem-based learning type of nature, the curriculum format at Western U, in the opinion of myself and my peers, we do believe that we learn a lot about the entire spectrum of care and secondarily how to avoid feeling imprisoned within the potential constraints that gold standard may create sometimes. For the younger classes, there are regular and group discussion-based courses that welcome open and passionate dialogue about both access to and the spectrum of care services that would constitute as gold standard. However, in those same meetings, students are genuinely encouraged to troubleshoot the potential barriers to care and those available services. And they were encouraged to do our best to collectively determine the most reliable and or economically feasible options for an individual patient and or client that's provided in those case studies. As referenced earlier this afternoon in the Access to Veterinary Care Task Force report, the third and fourth year students at Western U also have ample opportunity during the latter years of our curriculum to gain exposure and experience in a multitude of practice environments and amongst a variety of animal patient species and client populations. And so for these reasons, the students collectively believe that the curriculum well prepares them for future success within the industry and, more importantly, molds them as professionals who foster a high regard for highly individualized patient care that serves a wide spectrum of animal patients and their families. And finally, I'd like to sincerely thank the VMB for welcoming me today as the new VMB student liaison for Western U, and I humbly ask if there's anything in particular that the board would like me to address pertaining to Western U in the future to please let me know. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Do any of our members have any questions for either Mandy or Ally? Those are terrific presentations, and I don't know how you guys get any sleep, frankly. That was like, yeah, that is, yeah, exactly. How can you not be doing so much? Exactly. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but thank you so much and welcome. Hopefully we'll see you in person someday. All right, I think, pardon? Oh, public comment, I apologize. So any public comment from the room? I see none, so I'm going to go to the moderator. And this is on both student liaison reports.
Thank you, Madam Board President. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and send it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We will give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. And thank you, moderator, for all your terrific work and responsiveness today. At this point, excuse me, we're going to recess till tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And then we'll reconvene. We have all the different reports, and then we have election of board officers, and we'll go into closed session tomorrow for our executive officer evaluation. And that is it for today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen, Ms. Alba, very much for all your help today,
Sorry,
along with
so
Sarah.
dramatic.